The moment my name rolled through the speakers, warm and proud, something cold and violent split the air behind me. A chair scraped back so sharply it echoed through the entire auditorium, and before I could turn, my sister Liana was already on her feet, her face flushed, her chest heaving with a fury she had clearly been saving for this exact moment. "She doesn't deserve that degree," she screamed, her voice cracking like a whip across the crowd. It wasn't confusion, it wasn't impulse, it was intention. Every syllable was aimed at me like she had rehearsed it in front of a mirror, waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate me. The room reacted instantly. Applause died mid-clap. The cheerful graduation music sputtered into silence. Programs slipped from hands. The auditorium froze so completely that I could hear someone gasp in the back row. Parents twisted in their seats, students stood halfway up before sinking again, and a dozen cameras snapped upward, capturing the moment my sister tried to publicly break me. And in that suspended silence, I felt all the years of swallowed pain, ignored warnings, and quiet endurance settle in my chest like armor. Instead of shrinking the way she expected, shoulders folding, head down, pretending I didn't hear, I lifted my chin. My breathing steadied. My spine straightened. And with every eye in the room locked onto me, I took a single step forward, then another, each one slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly calm. I wasn't just walking to the stage, I was walking straight into the truth of everything Liana had tried to bury. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, but for the first time in my life, I didn't choke on it. I walked through it. Long before graduation day, the seeds of Liana's outburst were already growing in the quiet corners of our childhood. She had always competed with me for everything: praise at the dinner table, a moment of attention, even the smallest scraps of approval, but somewhere between high school and college, that rivalry twisted into something sharper. Something that followed her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. When my grades began climbing, when professors started knowing my name, when opportunities slipped into my inbox instead of hers, I saw the shift in her eyes, a flicker of resentment, then a slow burn that never really faded. And what made it worse, what poured gasoline over her jealousy, was how our parents handled it. Every time she mocked me, sneered at my accomplishments, or dismissed my hard work, they brushed it aside with a laugh, as if cruelty between sisters was harmless. And every time I achieved something, they leaned in with the same warning: "Don't brag, you'll upset your sister." They thought they were keeping peace. They thought they were balancing us. But all they did was teach Liana that my success was a personal attack and that her jealousy was something worth protecting. They didn't know it then, but they weren't shielding her from insecurity. They were shaping her into someone who would one day try to destroy me the moment she thought I stood too high. The sabotage didn't begin with explosions. It began with tiny fractures, quiet enough to dismiss, but sharp enough to leave marks. First, my study notes vanished the night before a major exam, pages I knew I'd left neatly stacked on my desk. I blamed myself. Then a rumor surfaced that I'd copied someone's assignment, vague enough to question, specific enough to sting. I told myself it was just campus gossip. But then came the missing emails, the forgotten messages, the subtle looks from classmates that suggested someone was whispering stories behind my back. Each incident alone felt like bad luck, but together they formed a pattern that hummed beneath my skin. And the moment the truth finally shattered through was one I'll never forget. A family gathering, voices low, laughter spilling from the kitchen. I walked past the hallway just as Liana leaned toward our cousin, her voice dipped in that familiar sweetness she saved for manipulation. "Watch," she whispered, smug and certain. "She won't make it to graduation looking innocent." My heart dropped all the way to my feet. The missing notes, the rumors, the strange glitches in my academic record, none of it was coincidence. None of it was random. It was her, my own sister, sabotaging my life piece by piece, and enjoying it. That was the night the pattern clicked, and the night I stopped giving her the benefit of doubt she never deserved. Liana never truly hated my achievements. What terrified her was what my success threatened to expose. For years, she had been the family's chosen star, the daughter everyone looked toward first, the one whose flaws were forgiven before they were even acknowledged. And as long as I stayed quiet, small, and compliant, her spotlight remained untouched. But the moment professors began praising my work, the moment opportunities started drifting toward me instead of her, something tightened inside her, a silent fear that if I rose, people would finally see the cracks in the throne she'd been sitting on her whole life. My growth felt like her downfall, even though I had never asked for the comparison. And for years, I dimmed myself to keep peace, speaking softer, celebrating gently, shrinking whenever she needed space to shine. But on the morning of graduation, while pinning my cap and looking at my reflection, I felt a stillness settle inside me. A clarity. A quiet rebellion. I whispered to myself, no more shrinking. No more stepping aside so she can stand taller. Today, I won't disappear for anyone. I didn't know then how quickly she would try to break that promise, but I knew, finally, that I would not let her. A month before graduation, when the chaos around me felt too precise to be coincidence, I finally decided to trace every false complaint, every anonymous accusation, every mysteriously altered message. What I found wasn't just sabotage, it was a digital trail, a line of fingerprints leading straight back to Liana's device. Her timestamps. Her IP address. Her name hidden behind fake accounts she thought were untraceable. Every lie she'd thrown into my path, every attempt to stain my reputation, sat in neat rows on my screen like confessions she never meant anyone to see. I remember staring at the folder I created, labeled quietly, deliberately, my hands steady not with anger, but with confirmation. I didn't plan to expose her. I didn't want our story to end like that. But after months of being pushed, manipulated, and undermined, I knew I had to protect myself. So on graduation day, beneath the smooth fabric of my gown, against my ribs, I carried that folder, printed files, screenshots, logs, every piece of truth sealed and ready. Not as revenge, but as preparation. I hoped I wouldn't need it. I hoped she would let the day belong to everyone, not just her bitterness. But when she stood up and screamed across the auditorium, forcing the world to look at me through her lies, she made the choice for me. She didn't just cross the line, she dared me to reveal everything she thought I'd never have the courage to show. The moment Liana finished her accusation, she expected applause, expected people to rise with her, to gasp in her favor, to treat her words like a heroic exposé. But instead, the room reacted with a slow, unified recoil. Her voice, once sharp and confident, began to waver as murmurs rippled through the seats, not supportive ones, confused, disapproving, startled. Each time she tried to shout again, the cracks in her confidence grew louder than her words. She wasn't performing for a crowd anymore, she was unraveling in front of one. And as I walked toward the stage, the atmosphere shifted completely. Phones lowered. Whispers sharpened. By the time I reached the podium, the dean's expression had already transformed, first a flicker of shock as I handed him the sealed folder from beneath my gown, then a dawning understanding as his eyes scanned the first few pages. He didn't need to read much to see the truth stitching itself together. The weight of the evidence, the timestamps, the logs, all pointed in one direction. He lifted his gaze toward Liana, and in that single look, cold, stunned, disbelieving, her triumph cracked open. The bravado drained from her posture, her smile collapsing into panic as she realized the room was no longer laughing with her. They were watching her fall apart. As Liana continued her unraveling behind me, her voice rising, cracking, clawing for control, the strangest thing happened. I didn't have to defend myself. I didn't need to argue or shout or match her rage. I simply stood there, still, steady, breathing in the silence that wrapped around me like armor. And somehow, that silence became the loudest sound in the room. While her accusations spiraled into desperation, my calmness exposed the truth she'd tried so hard to bury. The audience felt it, the shift, the change, the moment the narrative snapped out of her hands. The whispers that once circled around me began to redirect, soft at first, then sharper, turning one by one toward her. People who moments earlier looked at me with confusion now looked at her with dawning clarity and disappointment. Teachers narrowed their eyes. Students exchanged uneasy glances. Parents leaned toward each other, murmuring. And in that slow, undeniable ripple across the auditorium, something broke open. They finally saw her. Not the confident sister she pretended to be, not the victim she tried to portray, but the architect of chaos, the girl who had pushed too far for too long. For the first time in our lives, Liana wasn't the star of the story. She was the one being unmasked, and everyone was watching. The auditorium was still buzzing with uneasy silence when the dean finally lifted his microphone, not to hand me my diploma, but to speak a name no one expected to hear. "Liana Hart," he said, his voice firm enough to slice through the tension. For a heartbeat, the room didn't know how to react. Then, with calm authority, he gestured toward the aisle and instructed campus security to escort her out for creating a disruption during an academic ceremony. The shock on Liana's face was instant. Her triumph crumbled into disbelief as two officers approached, not aggressively, but with the sort of professional finality she couldn't argue with. She looked around wildly, searching for supporters, but the crowd she thought she controlled now stared at her with a mixture of confusion, disappointment, and something close to pity. And for the first time, she felt what she had tried to make me feel, exposed. Only after the doors closed behind her did the dean turn back to me, his expression softening as he lifted the diploma I had earned with 4 years of work she tried so hard to erase. When he finally placed it in my hands, it wasn't victory I felt, it was validation. I hadn't defended myself with words. I hadn't begged or justified. The truth had spoken for me, louder and clearer than anything she screamed. And as the audience rose in quiet applause, I realized the most powerful defense is simply standing firm when someone else's lies collapse on their own. When the ceremony ended and the crowd slowly dispersed, my parents rushed toward me, not with open arms, not with relief that I had survived public humiliation, but with panic carved into their faces. Not for me, for her. Their questions came fast and frantic, overlapping each other. How bad was it? Did the dean say what will happen to Liana? Can this be fixed? Not once did they ask if I was okay, if I'd been hurt, if the accusations had shaken me. Their fear wasn't for the daughter who had been attacked on stage, it was for the daughter who had been removed from it. And standing there in my gown, diploma still warm in my hands, I felt a truth settle over me heavier than anything Liana had done. They never saw the damage she caused because they never believed she could cause any. Their loyalty was automatic, instinctive, blind. But mine wasn't anymore. So when they finally paused long enough to ask, why would she do this? I didn't cushion it, I didn't soften it, I didn't offer excuses the way I always had. I met their eyes, steady, unflinching, and said the only sentence that finally forced them to face the truth. She did this to herself. And for the first time, they didn't have an argument, only silence. When I stepped out of the auditorium, the sunlight felt different, warmer, clearer, almost like it had been waiting for me to arrive. For the first time in years, I walked without the weight of defending myself, without the guilt of outshining someone who tried so hard to dim me, without the constant fear that another lie was waiting around the corner. I didn't look back at the doors, the crowd, or the chaos she left behind. That world could stay exactly where it was. Because the moment I crossed the threshold, something inside me finally settled. I wasn't carrying her jealousy, her insecurity, or her cruelty anymore. I was carrying my degree, my truth, and a strength she never expected me to grow. She tried to ruin my graduation, tried to stain the moment I had earned with years of sleepless nights and quiet resilience, but all she did was expose herself and mark the beginning of a life she could no longer touch. That day didn't end the way she planned. It ended the way I needed, with me walking forward, lighter, stronger, choosing myself in a way I never had before.